afternoon, everyone, and of course, good morning to our guest joining from New York. Welcome to this ELN webinar, 3 Strikes and We're Out. What comes next for the NPT review process? I'm Jana Baldus, Policy Fellow in ELN's Nuclear and Multilateral Disarmament Program, and I'll be hosting this webinar today. We are very honored to be joined by Ambassador Đỗ Hùng Việt, the outgoing president of the 2026 NPT Review Conference, for what I think will be a very rich and interesting conversation. As many of you know, the conference concluded on 22nd May without agreement on a consensus outcome document, which is the third RevCon in a row to end this way. So there's a lot to unpack today, what happened and what didn't in New York, the political and procedural fault lines behind the outcome and why consensus proved elusive, what this means for the next NPT review cycle, and of course, where the NPT goes from here. Before we start, just a few words on ELN and our work on multilateral nuclear diplomacy. The European Leadership Network, or ELN, is an independent, non-partisan, pan-European network of over 450 past, present, and future European leaders working to provide practical, real-world solutions to political and security challenges, with the broader aim of building better security for wider Europe. This webinar specifically is part of our Protecting the Non-Proliferation Treaty project, which has been generously funded, supported by the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And this project brings together senior policymakers, practitioners, next generation experts to support the NPT review process and the NPT in general, strengthen dialogue across divides, and develop practical measures to reduce nuclear risks and advance multilateral nuclear disarmament. And in this series, I would also like to extend a very special welcome to the project members from our network who have shaped the project in the past years and have also helped to prepare this webinar. Before we start with the conversation, just a couple of housekeeping notes. We have about an hour together. We'll start with a half-hour conversation between ELN and Ambassador Việt, led by Oliver Meier, head of ELN's Nuclear and Multilateral Disarmament Program, and then turn to a Q&A section, which will be moderated by me. We have a list of pre-submitted questions we'll draw on in the Q&A, but you're also welcome to post questions in the chat as we go. And you can also upvote questions you like to see prioritized. Given the limited time, we won't probably be able to get to everything. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on ELN's website afterwards. And before we turn to today's guest, one quick note. We have also just released a special episode of our podcast, OK Doomer, also on the NPT RevCon. It features great guests, including a debate on whether the NPT's grand bargain is broken with Ambassador Alexander Kment and former US Assistant Secretary of State Thomas Countryman, a great panel taking a closer look at the implications of the failed RevCon, and an interview with UN High Representative for Disarmament Affairs Izumi Nakamitsu on whether the NPT is still up to the task. The podcast is available on our website as well, and I'm not sure whether we can share the link in the Q&A chat, but if you're interested, just look at our website. So with that, let me properly introduce our guest. Ambassador Đỗ Hùng Việt served as president of the 11th NPT Review Conference, and he is currently permanent representative of Vietnam to the United Nations in New York. Prior to that, he was Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, and from 2019 to 2022, Director General and later Assistant Foreign Minister and Director General of the Department of International Organizations. And he actually brings quite an extensive background on nuclear issues. He supported Vietnam's engagement in developing ASEAN's plan of action to strengthen the Southeast Asia Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone Treaty, Vietnam's term on the IAEA Board of Governors, preparations for Vietnam's ratification of the CTBT, and its signing of the IAEA additional protocol. So really an extensive background on nuclear issues. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us today. And with that, I will hand over to Oliver for the conversation.
Thank you, Jana, and thank you, Ambassador, for taking the time to discuss with us the outcome of the review conference, some of the things that happened in New York. 3 months have passed since the end of the review conference. I hope you have recovered from it over the summer. It's a pleasure to be talking with you about this, about the outcome of the review conference. Let me maybe dive right in with a general question. Jana referred to the title of the event already, 3 strikes and you're out, ? We did receive some comments on that, also from participants who took issue with that title because it seems to imply that the treaty is near collapse, which is not at all what we at the ELN assume. But there were questions also from participants, and maybe that's one point to start the conversation, to the fact that the NPT is strong as a treaty, and we heard some of that at the review conference. At the same time, the review process is problematic. And the question, that a number of participants also had is, how do we reconcile these two things, that, the strong commitment to the treaty itself, at the same time, some of the deficiencies of the review process that have surfaced in New York. Maybe, be very interested in your thoughts. Thanks again.
Well, thank you very much, Jana, of course, for the introduction. And thank you, Oliver. And thanks, ELN, for having me today. I understand that the very substantive podcast was just released also today. So people would probably have a lot to digest within today on a Tuesday, beginning of the week. But let me also start on that 3 strikes and we're out. You're in Europe, but somehow you decided to use something very American, the baseball analogy. I'm a tennis player and a starter in golf. So I kind of disagree with that a little bit because as in tennis or in golf, 3 bad games, 3 bad holes only mean that you need to do better in the next holes. And you can only know the results at the very end of the game, rather than in baseball, you got kicked out after 3 strikes. So with that, I think, and I agree with what you just said about how the NPT remain strong as a treaty itself. But I think at the same time that a treaty or an organization, an institution, they can only be as strong as member states, as states parties make them. If you decide to sign up to a treaty, to join an organization, but then do not implement the obligations that you have taken up under that treaty, of course, there would be question marks about the legitimacy of the treaty itself and the strength of the treaty itself. Now, the review process is an opportunity for states parties to, well, it's in the name, to review the implementation of the treaty itself for a certain period of time. And for this time around, it was 4 years since the 2022 review conference. And I guess we can all agree that the overall context, the overall circumstances, security, strategically, have all been worsened. And, it is as much the process can do. And it cannot be separated from the overall context. So, it's part of the process. I think we can discuss about how we could, strengthen this process itself. But at the same time, I think we need to put that process within a much broader framework of the overall security strategic situation of the world today.
Thank you very much. I'd like to come back to that point you raised about what can be improved, in the future and what we can learn maybe a little bit later. But before that, maybe to look briefly back at those 4 weeks in New York, which you presided over. I think, you rightly deserved a lot of praise for the way you ran the conference. You introduced some, really important innovations, changes in procedure, tried to streamline the process, which I think was successful in many ways. But in the end, the circumstances turned out to be too difficult, probably, with 2 hot wars going on involving nuclear weapon states, the setbacks on nuclear disarmament, also the proliferation pressures which we are facing. You gave a very interesting press conference right after the conference had ended on that Friday night with Izumi Nakamitsu, and in that press conference you were asked about your assessment of the outcome, and you said, it may not have been enough, but it was not nothing. So, I just wanted to ask you whether, that's still your assessment, whether that has changed, and, what has been achieved, particularly, you think, over those 4 weeks. Thanks.
Well, again, I think we need to put the review conference itself within the broader context. I mentioned that, and that broader context, as you mentioned, was nuclear weapon states really reneging on their commitments. There were nuclear weapon states who did not want to implement past commitments, not to reconfirm the past commitments. There were talk about resuming nuclear testing. There was a major statement by France on forward deterrence. There were ICBM testing done by Russia during the conference. And then, as you said, 2 nuclear weapon states are directly involved in 2 hot conflicts where nuclear facilities were directly attacked. And then in addition to that, of course, the broader level of mistrust, I think, is higher than we have seen in many, many years, if not decades. And the regional security environment in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, in Asia, and in other areas were, of course, not conducive to any agreement. And then, we're seeing the same happening in all other multilateral fora. But given all that, I think that, the review conference itself, as I mentioned, and I still stick to what I said at the press conference, it was nothing, because I think it generated a high level of interest, a high level of in-depth discussion amongst the states parties, and also engagement from the civil society, from NGOs, from the academia, from the general public as well. It really generated a high level of interest, as we have seen. I think some of the innovations, as you mentioned, in particular, the early introduction of a draft outcome document, helped with generating that level of in-depth discussion. I learned from the experience of my predecessors, whose advice have been invaluable to me, really, in the preparation for the review conference. And I think the early engagement of all states parties in the discussion of the draft outcome document really generated some very good in-depth discussion on the various topics where they both converge but also diverge primarily. I think the conference itself fulfilled its core function as a review conference. I think as for all review conferences, this is the occasion for a comprehensive discussion on a full range of nuclear issues, from disarmament, non-proliferation, to strategic stability, to nuclear use risks, to testing, to arms control, transparency, accountability, peaceful uses of nuclear technology and energy. And I think there is a fundamental agreement on the value of the NPT itself. And that, I guess, is the most important outcome of this review conference. Well, even though it was not put pen and paper because of the lack of an outcome document, but I did not hear anyone questioning the continued relevance of the NPT itself. But I think there was also a growing concern, especially amongst non-nuclear weapon states, and especially those who are not under any nuclear umbrella or nuclear deterrence arrangements, about the fact that disarmament progress is not only being made, but also being seen as major, walking back on the commitments. And I think the discussion also revealed a sense of agreement that this framework should not be only about non-proliferation, but on a much broader strategic stability and the broader issue of how this global nuclear order should look like. So it was really the task for the president to keep that discussion focused and manageable. And I think that the early drafting of the outcome document helped.
Thanks. I think many would agree that this was really a step forward. Before we kind of discuss areas of convergence and where there were positive developments, I think some participants, and I'm also interested in, in the end game and why in the end it was not possible to reach consensus on a final outcome document. You said since the conference a couple of times explained what happened, and that you decided not to put up the final document for adoption because you wanted to avoid putting one state party on the spot, having to object, particularly on this paragraph 15 on Iran, which was the only paragraph that remained in brackets. And I think people can see and understand that logic. But in this press conference on the Friday night, you also said there may have been other difficulties as well, and that some brackets were not visible, you said. So to the degree that you can, 3 months in, can you elaborate a little bit on what these other difficulties may have been and what degree of agreement you had on these other, 42 paragraphs in the final document? Thanks.
Well, there were, of course, many very difficult issues for discussions, and a lot of disagreements came up during the negotiation as well as the general debate of the conference. I think one of the biggest question is, of course, on disarmament, on implementation of Article 6. There were very clear signals from the nuclear weapon states that they were not ready to make any progress on disarmament, if not reneging on their commitments, which of course created a lot of frustration amongst the non-nuclear weapon states, especially amongst the non-aligned movement member states. We have always believed that past commitments is something we should take for granted, but at this conference, at least 2 of the nuclear weapon states were not ready to recommit to those past commitments. They range from the CTBT, the nuclear testing issues, and in particular the implementation of the 2010 action plan, some particular actions and articles in there. And then the issue of humanitarian consequences. There was also some step back in terms of commitments from the nuclear weapon states. So that's on the more on the disarmament Article 6 implementation. Extended deterrence was a major fault line for many member states, especially the NATO countries. It came up quite prominently in the early discussion of the debate, and that is why it appeared in the draft outcome document in all the versions that I introduced until the very last one. Then there is the different issues under the non-proliferation pillar, where there were differences, but not at a level which I believe would have caused consensus to break. Under the peaceful use pillar, I guess the biggest issue was the attacks on civilian, on nuclear facilities. We saw that, creating the deadlock of the 2022 review conference, and again, it was the issue here at this 2026 review conference as well. And I think the biggest, most problematic set of issue were the regional issues. Again, we saw the 2015 review conference break down on the Middle East. We saw the 2022 review conference break down on Ukraine, of course, with a lot of other, square brackets. And then at this conference, we saw it breaking down over Iran. But here I need to highlight the fact that I decided in the fourth version of the draft outcome document to remove all other regional issues. So we did not see Ukraine, we did not see DPRK, and we had some language on the Middle East. So there were, on the last day, discussions in the corridor about whether or not some countries may break consensus because of the lack of the mentioning of DPRK or Ukraine. And of course, there were discussions that I had with the different parties about how to resolve the issue that relates to Iran on that last day. Now, on all other issues, I think the draft was acceptable to states parties. So when I talk about the invisible brackets, I guess they're invisible because the issue itself is not mentioned in the draft, rather than those issues that were there. So, if I decided to have the last iteration of the draft mentioning DPRK, mentioning Ukraine, talking about extended deterrence, I think, I can gamble and put it out there to see who blinks, right? And who breaks the consensus. But I don't think it is a useful way to conduct business. Yes, I decided to go the way I did with the last version of the text.
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting and I think helpful answer to understand what happened. Just to follow up on one issue, because I think some of us also in the think tank NGO world have been particularly interested in transparency and accountability as one way to improve also performance of the NPT. And before the review conference, many were hoping and believed that the issue was ripe for progress. On this specific issue, can you give us a sense on how close you were to actually having an agreement on this? There were also, some proposals to separate this out to have a separate agreement on this, and what resistance you encountered on such a way to actually make progress on transparency and accountability. Thank you.
I was quite pleased with how much progress we made on this issue of transparency and accountability. Of course, we built a lot upon the good work that the working group that was established at the last review conference had done over the past few years. Of course, there were very strong resistance at the beginning of the conference, but we managed to iron out many of the differences and get everyone on board. So the language that you saw in the last version of the draft outcome document was something that everyone was agreeable to. But at the same time, they were only agreeable to as a part of a larger package of the outcome document. And that is why it was unfortunately not adopted as a whole, but the section itself was carefully managed and drafted with the help of the co-facilitators of a process that I initiated within the review conference, led by our excellent colleagues from Switzerland and South Africa. So for which I'm, of course, very grateful. So it's, I have to say that it's very unfortunate that this part of, or the outcome document was not adopted, and then therefore we lost this. There was some discussion about having a separate decision. I decided during the review conference that I, as president, would only pursue one single outcome document rather than separating certain parts from that one outcome document. But I also, floated the idea to states parties that if they come to me with some proposal about a separate decision, I can certainly facilitate a discussion about that. But it was not until the last session of the conference that one delegation proposed to have a separate decision, which, of course, understandably was rejected by several delegations because there was simply not enough time, and for all these issues, we do need time and proper discussion to facilitate consensus. So it's one area where I think we have made a lot of progress, and I remain quite disappointed that we could not get this through because we would have the next review conference have at least a session on the nuclear weapon states presenting their national reports and engaging in interactive discussions with other states parties. And we would also have some other states parties, non-nuclear weapon states, engaging in similar discussions. So it would have been a very good review conference. And I have been thinking and probably will engage with states parties to see how we can follow up on this and if this again can be built upon and make some progress in the next few years.
Thank you. Just to follow up and also, trying to get into a discussion on what comes next and what we can do in this review cycle. 2 days after the end of the review conference, you posted a tweet. And on a Sunday, I might add, when everybody else was reeling from the review conference still. And one of the things you tweeted out was, quote, "I expect nuclear weapon states to follow through on their commitment to, 1, engage in substantive talks leading to future arms control discussions, and 2, implement risk reduction measures to help push back the dangers of a nuclear war, which would have catastrophic humanitarian consequences." why did you single out these topics, and how do you think the NPT also in this review cycle can help to get disarmament back on track and also reduce risks of nuclear war, which many of us are truly worried about? Thank you.
You probably will recall that before the review conference, I think during the course of the last 3, almost 4 years, the nuclear weapon states did not have many meetings on nuclear issues. Basically, they met in Cairo and then they met in Casablanca twice. And after each of the meetings, there was no outcome, there was no agreement. Someone told me they couldn't agree even on the press release saying that they met from that to that date. So there was the lack of engagement amongst the nuclear weapon states. Now, we then, in the preparation and the lead up to the review conference, kind of tried to build a momentum for the nuclear weapon states to engage with each other in discussion, preparing for the conference, but also, prepare for any agreement, any outcome of the review conference. And what was very encouraging was the fact that they, during the review conference, met 4 times. And they sat down. Some of the meetings lasted several hours. They sat down and discussed and negotiated on, texts to be shared with me as president. And they could reach a certain level of agreement. Of course, for non-nuclear weapon states, when the nuclear weapon states agree, it does not necessarily mean good things, right? But we do not want them to disagree either. So I saw the fact that they engaged and they could agree on some issue as a positive movement and a positive outcome of this review conference. This, again, I come back to the context because the level of mistrust, the level of backtracking on commitments, the level of a nuclear arms race being started and going on, I think is dangerous enough for us to see the strong need for nuclear weapon states to engage with each other, to talk about strategic stability, to talk about how they can move towards arms control, how they can move towards reducing the risks of nuclear war, how they can move towards disarmament. So again, the 2 issues that I mentioned in my tweet are the 2 issues where I thought we did make a lot of progress, and that because all the nuclear weapon states have agreed basically amongst themselves, and these are issues that they themselves would need to implement. So there's no reason why they would not, especially in terms of engaging with each other in discussions that could lead to arms control talks. And there are a set of measures and mechanisms that were listed in there for the nuclear weapon states to engage with each other. And similarly on risk reduction, they could also agree on a set of measures to mutually implement, to mutually work towards reducing the risk of nuclear weapon use. So again, those are the 2 sets of issues that I thought was major improvements and major progress. And, again, the nuclear weapon states have agreed on and should implement. Doesn't matter if there are other issues or other parties involved or not.
Thank you for that really, really useful answer. Final question from me before I turn over to Jana and questions from participants. And maybe, to take your answer and turn that into a question about the review process going forward. And we have that problem that two of the three depository states who are also permanent members of the UN Security Council are engaged in wars with a nuclear dimension. Nuclear threats have become commonplace in today's environment, unfortunately, and important states are ignoring the UN Charter. The US representative in the final session actually warned that we, quote, may have witnessed the end of the relevancy of the review conference process. Against this background, I know it's always difficult to give advice to people coming in, and the next PrepCom will be in less than 2 years' time. But if you had one piece of advice to make this review cycle more meaningful, more effective, and also to keep it interesting, what would that be? How can we deal with these kind of structural problems of disengagement of at least some of the nuclear weapon states from the process? Thank you.
I think a lot of things will have changed between now and the next review conference, or even the next PrepCom. So it would be premature for me to give any advice at this stage to the next review conference president. But looking back on my own experience, there are certain things that I hoped could have been done differently. For example, the appointment of the president, I think, could have been done earlier so that the president, him or herself, would have more time to engage with states parties, even during the PrepComs, and already starting to think about and identify the areas of convergence, divergences, and how he or she may like the process to look like entering the review conference. Secondly, I have found, for example, that the review process itself probably will need to be changed. Now, of course, I understand there is a lot of political sensitivities in how the process itself has been designed. But I have seen that the three PrepComs are a little bit like three mini review conferences. So they are separated. They discuss the different issues, but then there is no linkage amongst them, and there is no continuity amongst the meetings of the PrepComs. So if there can be enough interest generated amongst the states parties to somehow change that entire cycle, to create more continuity, building on the next conference, building on the last, I think would be much more helpful for the review conference itself and for the president. And lastly, I think that we have introduced a number of innovations, as you also mentioned, that could be useful to continue. I heard people were quite happy with the time limits, not only on statements, but also on the rights of replies. The people were happy about the streamlining of the conference itself, the question of the subsidiary bodies, how to make use of them or not make use of them. And also, in particular, I think an early introduction of the draft outcome document. These are things that I think could be useful to either continue or improve on. And I think those are the things in terms of the review cycle itself that I would like to see improved in the next cycle.
Thank you very much. I think that resonates with a lot of us. Thanks for all these interesting answers, and over to Jana, who has more questions, including from some of the participants. Thanks.
Exactly. Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you, Oliver, for that really interesting conversation. We're now going to move to the Q&A sections. We only have about 15 minutes left. So reminder, you can also post questions in the chat, but I'm afraid we don't have time for all the questions that I still have on my list from this pre-submitted questions also. Let me get right into it with coming back to the obstacles to the outcome document. And we had a question pre-submitted. What actually was the biggest challenge to reaching consensus on a final document? And related to that, also another question by Mark Goodman, fellow of the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, whether you foresaw the deadlock over naming Iran in a final declaration, and whether if you can describe what efforts were made to avert that deadlock.
Well, the biggest challenge to the NPT and the NPT Review Conference is the existence of nuclear weapons. If we can get rid of them, we would have very nice review conferences, you know. No, but joking aside, I think, again, it's the unequal nature of the states parties within the NPT framework. That is, you know, the inherent challenge posed to any review conference. It will continue to be so, and you know, it's something that we have to live with and we have to try and work with. On the question about Iran and naming Iran, I have believed from the beginning that the naming of any of the regional issue, I mean, I kind of loosely use regional issue as referred to refer to the issues of Ukraine, DPRK, and Iran. Mentioning of any of those would be problematic for the adoption of the outcome document. If you know, we had language on Ukraine, something like 2022 may happen. If we have language on DPRK, for example, same thing. And on Iran, again, same thing. But at the same time, if we do not mention any of those, they can also be problematic. And that is what in this particular instance, the issue of Iran was for, you know, the two sides. Iran would block if it is mentioned, and the US would block the consensus if Iran is not mentioned. It's understandable. Hot conflict was going on at that very stage. So I spent the last day of the review conference talking to both sides as well as to other partners to try and find a solution. There were some language proposals that I had, and I presented to both sides to try and find a compromise between the two sides. There were many who helped with that. There were many meetings in Vienna, in Tehran, in other places. There were many phone calls that were made to help and try to resolve it. But unfortunately, all that was to no avail, and we could not reach an agreement on how to deal with that particular issue. And that is why I decided not to present that final version for adoption.
Thank you, Ambassador. We're going to turn towards looking a bit more into the future with a question of about what needs to be done to achieve consensus at future NPT RevCons, and related to that, another question: which poses the greater long-term threat to the NPT: repeated failure to agree on final documents, or preserving a consensus only by lowering the bar and diluting commitments? So how can this cycle of repeated failure that we have seen actually be broken?
I think the need to maintain the principle of consensus is paramount. I think we can. There is some discussion about why not put things up for voting? That is always an option, procedurally speaking. And there were questions, directed to me about, why not put the draft outcome document out there for one country to break the consensus, or even up for voting. But again, here I think the judgment call of the president will be very important, because when you present a document up for voting, you will need to think very hard on how you want that document to look like. I mean, I could have presented a draft out there mentioning Iran, but I could have also put out there a document not mentioning Iran, or I could have put out there a document having very strong language on nuclear disarmament, on humanitarian consequences, on extended deterrence. And I mean, I probably would have it adopted by voting. I think I would get more than enough majority to get it adopted. But then what use would it be to the review conference itself or to the NPT if such a document is adopted by voting, is not implemented, right? So, I mean, if we look at the end game, losing 2-3 holes in a golf game, for example, does not mean that you lose the entire game. But, you continue to work hard to try and build on what you may have achieved, the small steps that you may have achieved. And in this particular instance, we just discussed, the progress in terms of risk reduction, the progress in terms of multilateral engagements amongst the nuclear weapon states, are things that we can certainly build on moving forward. So again, that's my view on how I think we still need to stick to consensus and try to build consensus. And if we do that, if we do not wait till the review conference to start doing so, we can, I hope, be able to achieve something at the next review conference. Again, I'm a very optimistic person, so yeah.
Which is great to hear, and also your response leads directly to the next question by Ahmed Uzumzo, who is actually a member of the project, and he asked what would be your recommendation as to the way to give new impetus to the NPT processes to preserve the credibility and integrity of the NPT. Would a new coalition of interested state parties, could such a coalition take the lead in such efforts? And also, could civil society play a useful role in this regard? And just adding one of the questions from the chat from Sebastian Brixey-Williams from BASIC, who asked what you have wished also for think tanks and civil society as kind of a support pillar, also for the NPT to have done more during your tenure, and what we can also do differently and more in supporting the next review cycle.
Let me first of all say that I am extremely grateful to the civil society for your active engagement before the conference and during the conference. I have benefited significantly from all the conversations that I have had with many of our colleagues in the academia, as well as in the civil society and other organizations, the think tanks, during the preparation for the review conference. So I have benefited a lot from those conversations to get a better understanding of the process, of the issues at stake, and formulate my approach to the conference. Now, what else you can do, or what more you can do? Of course, there are a lot of things that all of us can do more to improve on not only the review process, but the overall situation. I have said this on other occasions, but one of the scariest thing for me when I talk about nuclear issues and when I engage in the discussions is the fact that people are no longer or seem no longer to be scared of nuclear weapons. So it feels to me in some conversations that people kind of brush off the severity of the issue. And they talk about nuclear weapons as if it's another kind of weapon that we can live with, and that it will we will survive a nuclear war, somehow. And that makes me think about the days during the Cold War when we talked so much about mutually assured destruction. We talked so much about doomsday. There were ads running in TV about how a nuclear attack would look like. Of course, we had recent, movies on Netflix, the House of Dynamite and Oppenheimer, but I guess we have not been able to create this sense of urgency amongst the broader public about this danger to all of us. We don't have this people's movement against nuclear war, against nuclear weapons, like we did in the 80s and the 90s. So I think that is where the think tanks, the academia, the civil society must come in and, knock on the doors of the congressmen, the people in government, your neighbors, people around you, to make people understand and, again, raise this level of concern over the issue. I think by only so doing can we really create a stronger movement against nuclear weapons and therefore help, put some more pressure on the nuclear weapon states. Now, I had a recent discussion with a colleague about the division we are seeing amongst the major powers. And one of the points he made was, of course, we hope that there would not be a World War III to bring people back together. But he also expected that a major crisis would have to happen before the major powers, get to their senses and understand that they need to work together. Just like when they ended the Second World War and created the United Nations. And that may be an AI crisis, but to think about it, it may also be a nuclear crisis. Something that we saw in 1963 in the Cuban Missile Crisis. But do we really want to go there? And do we really need to go there before we come to our senses about the need to work together is something that, again, we all need to speak up and make our policymakers understand and take seriously.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question. So I would like to turn attention a bit toward the next big conference that we're about to see this year, the review conference, first review conference of the TPNW. And we had some questions pre-submitted about how you envision the outcomes of the NPT Review Conference, so the failure of the RevCon actually affecting the TPNW Review Conference end of November.
I think there have been a lot of suggestions that if we let the NPT fail, there will be much more progress made for the TPNW Review Conference. But again, there is some difficulties in the TPNW Review Conference as well. None of the nuclear weapon states are there. And there is, of course, very strong opposition from the nuclear weapon states against the TPNW. I can recall very vividly how some of the nuclear weapon states came to me and wanted to get rid of the paragraph on the TPNW, even though it was only a very factual reference to the TPNW itself. So there is some, I guess, some expectation that the TPNW Review Conference would make strong pronouncements on moving towards a nuclear weapon-free world. But I guess it remains to be seen how much progress we can make there in November, December. I think it's for the South African presidency to perhaps respond to that question a bit later on.
All right. I think we unfortunately have need to come to an end to let you get started with your morning in New York. So, Ambassador, thank you so much for your time, for your candid and really thoughtful responses. It's been generally interesting to hear your first-hand account of what happened in New York and what it means for the NPT, of course. Thank you also to Oliver for leading the conversation, to everyone who helped in the background to make the event possible, and of course to our project members. I'm sorry that I couldn't get to all of the questions. But thank you very much all for joining us today, and we hope that this webinar was as insightful to you as it was for us. And just as a reminder, the webinar was recorded and will be made available on our website shortly. And of course, if today's conversation left you wanting more, do listen to our special episode of our podcast with Ambassador Clement, Thomas Countryman, and High Representative Izumi Nakamitsu. And again, thank you all for joining us. Have a good rest of your day, evening, or of course, morning in New York and the US. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you,
It was a pleasure.
Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you.